Good morning. Good morning, guys. My name is Lucy, for those who don't know. Just get into it. Okay, great. As some of you may know, I'm now ending my first year as a freshman in my new high school, Beacon. Coming out of middle school, I was confident and sure this was going to be a piece of cake because I had already figured out middle school and could apply that all to my new school. I knew the perfect ways to study, the ways to make friends, the ways to climb the social ladder, and ended up feeling confident and comfortable in school life, whether it was with my grades, sports-wise, or social-wise. The overall idea is I was comfortable. But in the first week of high school, I quickly realized that there was a lot more that I needed to learn. And that sometimes having a lot of friends and having real friends are two different things. Looking back, I realized that entering something new required more than just learning things. I had to let go of expectations, of fears, and assumptions that I brought with me. I look back and realize sometimes growth only begins when we are disrupted and forced to unlearn. Change is something every one of us experiences. Sometimes we choose it, and sometimes it chooses us. We move to new places, we meet new people, we start new schools, we graduate, we lose friendships, we make new friendships, and face situations we've never expected. Most of the time, when we talk about growth, we focus on learning. We celebrate learning because learning feels productive. We celebrate the good grades. We celebrate diplomas and awards and accomplishments. We celebrate graduation, just like today, because it marks everything we have done over the years. But sometimes we miss the fact that growth isn't just about learning, but real growth also requires unlearning. Einstein had to unlearn assumptions about space and time, that space and time before the theory of reality could exist. Galileo had to unlearn assumptions about what was true about the Earth before discovering that it was not the fixed point of the universe. And Saul had to unlearn an entire theology about who God was, and it wasn't before he helped catapult the first church into existence. And we are not so different from them. Whether you're a parent, a diplomat, a scientist, or student, you've probably experienced the same thing. The idea is, before you can become who God made you to be, you have to be willing to let go of who you thought they were. The story that we just listened to of Saul's conversion in Acts 9 teaches us exactly that. Saul's encounter with Jesus wasn't just about learning something new, but it was allowing God to completely transform the way he understood himself, others, and God. And that transformation sure did not happen overnight. Now, 3 steps. First, be willing to be stopped. When we first meet Saul in Acts 9, he's not confused. He's not questioning himself. He's not looking for guidance. He's confident. He believes he's doing God's work by persecuting Christians. He's convinced the followers of Jesus are dangerous and wrong. He believes he's protecting his faith. In Saul's mind, he's the hero of the story. Then everything changes. As he travels towards Damascus, a bright light suddenly flashes around him. He falls to the ground and hears a voice say, "Saul, Saul, why are you opposing me?" Imagine that moment. Everything Saul believes about God, faith, and righteousness is just suddenly challenged. The person who thought he was serving and helping and being the hero was now confronting him and telling him he was the one in the wrong. Saul was literally knocked off his horse. Unlearning begins with a disruptive moment. The focus forces you to pause and question what you've always believed. But it's actually stopping and pausing long enough to accept that your current framework might be wrong. Not defending, not rushing, but being courageous enough to stop and go, could I be wrong? And what happens if I am? Sometimes we're just too afraid of what might happen if we are wrong. And so we keep moving, we keep creating false narratives and continue to live in untruth, which is problematic because God loves us so much that God will only meet us in reality. So, where in your life right now are you moving so fast, so confidently, that you might be missing a moment that's trying to stop you? What is one belief, assumption, or way of seeing yourself or others that you've never really questioned and what might change if you did. If there is an area in your life where you already sense God might be asking, why are you opposing me? But you've been too afraid to slow down and honestly just answer. Before Saul could become Paul, he had to let go of who he was. Before he could preach the gospel, he had to stop persecuting believers. Before he could see God's plan clearly, he had to admit that he didn't understand everything fully. And this can be difficult because we naturally hold on to things that feel comfortable and familiar. Sometimes we need to unlearn fear. Fear tells us we aren't capable. Fear tells us change is dangerous. Fear tells us to stay where we are. But God often calls us forward. Sometimes we need to unlearn pride. Pride tells us we already know enough. Pride tells us we don't need help. Pride tells us we're admitting we're wrong is weakness. But God teaches humility. Sometimes we need to unlearn assumptions about other people. We judge too quickly. We make decisions before hearing their stories. We assume we know what they're thinking, yet God repeatedly calls us to love, listen, and to just understand. Growth isn't just adding something new, but sometimes growth means letting go of something old. So, step one, be willing to be stopped. And why? Is because before you can become who God made you to be, you have to be willing to let go of who you thought you were. Next, sit with not knowing. Have a season of blindness. After his encounter, Saul went blind for 3 days and fasted. This represents the really uncomfortable and uncertain in-between stage of unlearning. Everything Saul believes about God, faith, and righteousness is just suddenly challenged. The person who he thought was serving and helping was now confronting him and telling him he was in the wrong. Jesus doesn't simply give Saul more information. Jesus changes his entire perspective. That's got to be difficult. Most of us don't enjoy being wrong. I know I don't. We like certainty. We like feeling that we have things figured out. We like having plans and knowing where we're going and knowing what we're doing and knowing what's next. But sometimes God's greatest work begins when our confidence in ourselves is shaken. Sometimes God has to challenge our understanding before he can actually deepen our faith. I wish that when I started this past year and realized I didn't know what I didn't know about high school, I could quickly download the truth or have a revelation that would all be set. But I wasn't. It was months of learning about those new transitions. It was months and months of uncertainty. This is the hard part of unlearning. You now know you were wrong, but you don't fully understand what is now right. And so there's time to practice letting go of old certainties before new ones are fully formed. Time embracing silence, stillness, and humility. Time to resist the pressure to immediately have answers. Because sometimes you must sit in the dark before light actually comes. My grandpa found out he's sick over these past few months, and he has to wait on one test result, and then another, and then another, and another. And frankly, his future is very uncertain. He hates the unknown, and I hate it too. But I think that is what we were created for, because that is the space where we can finally depend on God, like a kid that trusts their good parent. One of the most interesting parts of the story is what happens after Saul meets Jesus. For 3 days, he cannot see. For 3 days, he doesn't eat or drink, and for 3 days, he waits. Why would God do that? If Jesus could appear in a bright light from heaven, surely he could just heal Saul instantly. But instead, God allows Saul to sit in an uncertainty. That's because transformation takes time. The encounter happens in a moment. The change happened through a process. And that's often how God works in our life. We live in a world that wants instant results. We want instant answers, instant success, instant solutions. But God often works slowly. He teaches patience. He develops character. He strengthens faith. Sometimes we're in a hurry to get to the next chapter, while God is still teaching us lessons in the current one. Those 3 days of blindness were not wasted, but they were part of Saul's transformation. And sometimes our waiting season are part of ours. So where are you rushing to find answers or fill the silence where God actually might be doing his deepest work in the waiting? Is there any one or something you need to finally release control of. Not because you have it figured out, but because you're ready to trust like a child trusts a good parent. So, step 1, be willing to be stopped. Step 2, a season of blindness and to sit with not knowing. And why? It's because before you can become who God made you to be, you have to be willing to let go of who you thought you were. And the final step, receiving new input. Submit to a new community and a new teacher. Earlier today, you were able to hear from Ellie and Scotland. Scotland and Ellie have been my 2 best friends for as long as I can remember. As of right now, Ellie is finishing up 7th grade and going into 8th grade, while Scotland is finishing up 8th grade and going into 9th grade, and as I have mentioned, I am in 9th grade and going into 10th. So it's 8, 9, 10. With me being the oldest of this 3, and in a good, healthy relationship, it's normal to disagree about things all the time. Us 3 have had the most confusing and stupid and weird disagreements, but we have them. One of them, which Ellie had told me to clarify that this was years ago, was that we used to be obsessed with this one monkey stuffed animal that we named Monkey Moo. We don't know why we named it that, but we did. And since it belonged to Scotland, she slept with it every night. But when we spent the night, me and Ellie had to share it and change every other sleepover of who would get it. And one night, I had Monkey Moo, and we were starting to get into bed, and Ellie goes, "No, it's my turn tonight. You had him last week." And my immediate response was, "No, you had him last week. It's time for me to sleep with him." And we went back and forth and back and forth. This poor little Scotland tried not to take sides, but she was like, "I need to sleep." And finally pulls out a picture on her iPad of me and Monkey Moo sleeping from the week before. And I just handed the monkey over with a glare and rolled over to sleep without admitting that I was wrong. Of course, I look back and I think, what a stupid disagreement. But that experience is able to show that growth doesn't always happen when we prove we're right, but sometimes growth happens when we're willing to listen and admit our mistakes, which I didn't do, and see things from a different perspective, aka the picture on the iPad. Saul had to learn that lesson too. Saul didn't figure it out alone though. Ananias came to him, restored his sight, and he was baptized. And then we were told in Acts 9, 17 through 19, that he goes and spends elongated time with the disciples. Paul placed himself under new teachers and mentors. He built new relationships that reinforced the paradigm, but he also received new perspectives. So, what does this mean for us? Many of us are entering seasons of change. Some of us are graduating, and some of us are preparing for a new school. Some of us are facing difficult decisions, and some of us are dealing with uncertainty about friendships and family or the future, and uncertainty can be uncomfortable. We want to know what's next, and we want a clear road map. We want guarantees, but faith doesn't just work like that. Faith isn't knowing every step. Faith is trusting God with the next step and walking through the unlearning process. Saul couldn't see where he was going yet God was still leading him. The same is true for us. Even when we don't understand the whole picture, God is still at work. Even when we're confused, God is still guiding us. Even when we're waiting, God is still transforming us if we unlearn. Graduation is one of the best examples of what we're talking about today because we celebrate everything we've learned, but graduation is also an invitation into the unknown. No graduate knows exactly what the future holds. There's new opportunities, new challenges, and new lessons, but following Jesus is similar. God calls us to keep learning, but he also calls us to keep unlearning, to let go of fear, and to let go of pride, to let go of assumptions that prevent us from seeing him clearly. Like Saul, we are invited to trust God, even when we don't have all the answers. Like Saul, we are able to follow him into places that may feel uncertain. Like Saul, we can trust God that God is working even when we cannot see what he is doing at the moment. And my hope is that we would become people who are willing to learn, who are willing to unlearn, and willing to trust God through every single season of change. And yes, it may be hard, it may hurt, and it may challenge us, but transformation takes time. Growth takes time. Faith takes time. But God is faithful through it all. So step 1, be willing to be stopped. Step 2, sit with not knowing and have a season of blindness. And step 3, receiving new input. Submit to a new community and teacher. And remember, before you can become who God made you to be, you have to be willing to let go of who you thought you were.